On the day Ethan admitted his feelings to that unfortunate girl, he confined me within the storage room. I pounded on the door, pleading for my release. Ethan stood there, one hand tucked into his pocket, nonchalantly declaring, "Lily, this is your consequence for defaming her, so just accept it." After 16 hours of being trapped, he finally let me out. At the entrance of the storage room, Ethan held the girl's hand, grinning lazily. "Don't forget to bring us breakfast tomorrow." Following that incident, I quietly switched schools and never crossed paths with him again. I later learned that Ethan had been searching for me everywhere. 3 years passed before he was waiting for me beneath my dormitory, gripping my shoulders tightly, his teeth clenched. "Lily, is your heart truly compassionate? How could you just leave me like that? The gift my father gave me was a watch, a white strap, a silver face. It wasn't expensive, but it cost him half his monthly earnings." However, the watch suddenly disappeared and reappeared on Sarah's wrist. When I discreetly asked her to return it, Sarah looked at me incredulously. "What are you talking about? This is my watch, not yours." As I noticed our classmates beginning to stare, Sarah abruptly raised her voice. "I know you've always looked down on students like me, but how can you accuse me of stealing just because you lost something?" With that statement, the surrounding classmates, unaware of the situation, began whispering. "Why does she despise students from less fortunate backgrounds? Her mother is just a waitress, right?" Others speculated. However, Sarah's watch did resemble the one Lily had worn the other day. Considering Sarah was on government assistance, how could she afford such a watch? My watch had a scratch on the face, a result of cutting vegetables for my mother. At that moment, the watch on Sarah's wrist bore the exact same scratch. Pointing this out, Sarah hesitated briefly before hastily hiding her hand behind her back, stubbornly insisting that the scratch was from me using scissors. Her explanation was weak, and the classmate started murmuring about her. Just then, Ethan entered the classroom, carrying his backpack. Spotting Sarah, she looked up as if she'd seen a lifeline, her eyes brightening. "Ethan?" Hearing Sarah's side of the story, Ethan patted her head. Turning his gaze to me, he narrowed his eyes and coldly commanded, "Apologize to Sarah." Confused, I asked, "Apologize for what?" Ethan lifted Sarah's wrist. "This watch, I bought it for her. A few days ago, she mentioned she liked your watch, so I purchased it for her at the mall store." Ethan added, raising an eyebrow, "Lily, you understand how important reputation is. Yet because you looked down on a less fortunate student, you accused her of theft. Don't you think you should apologize?" With just a few words, Ethan turned the situation around. It turned out he was the one who had gifted the watch to Sarah. "Looks like we were wrong about her. Who cares about the scratch? Maybe Lily just fabricated the story. How could Lily do this? Without knowing the facts, she simply blamed Sarah." Seeing this, Sarah smirked at me mockingly, her grin provocative. She subtly pointed towards her drawer and without hesitation blocked it. But I clearly saw a brand new watch in the corner of her drawer, the one Ethan had given her. "The watch you gave her is in her drawer. This one is obviously mine," I said, growing desperate, shouting at Ethan, "Why don't you check her drawer?" Sarah suddenly began to cry. "Are you going to search my drawer now? Why should I let you?" She stared at me defiantly, tears on the verge of spilling. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy. The new watch is in your drawer. All you need to do is move aside and everyone will see it." I even attempted to offer her an escape. "Maybe there are just two watches that look alike. You might have accidentally taken mine." But as soon as I suggested that, Sarah's tears began to fall. "Because I'm a less fortunate student, does that mean if someone gives me a watch, you automatically assume I stole it?" She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, lifting her chin defiantly. "Fine, search it." Despite her words, Sarah kept her back pressed against the drawer, refusing to budge. Before I could act, Ethan suddenly grabbed my arm, his voice icy as he snapped, "Enough. If you lost something, admit it. If you're still contemplating, I'll give you 10,000 yuan to buy a new one. Stop harassing Sarah here." I overheard some classmates whispering, "Oh, so Lily is trying to extort Ethan's money." I quickly clarified, "I'm not." But Ethan suddenly leaned in, a sly smile forming on his lips. "Lily, why are you acting so superior? Have you been spending so much time with me that you really think you're on the same level as me?" Sarah is a less fortunate student, and your mother is just a waitress at a restaurant. Who are you looking down upon? Ethan continued. I'm from an ordinary working class family, while Ethan is a wealthy second generation. In theory, we shouldn't have anything to do with each other. However, when Ethan ran away from home as a child, he had an asthma attack and collapsed at the entrance of my mother's restaurant. My mother took him to the hospital and saved his life. From then on, Ethan would visit my mother's restaurant daily after school to buy a meal, becoming close to me. In middle school, even though we weren't classmates, Ethan would wait for me at the classroom door after each class. He'd lean lazily against the doorway, his slightly messy hair covering his eyes, and wave, "Let's go home." After I left, he would naturally take my backpack, walking with me through the long alley to my house. Upon reaching my home, he'd turn his back to the setting sun and wave in the fading light. "I'll pick you up for school tomorrow." I had always believed that Ethan and I were truly good friends. But now, with a smile on his face, Ethan questioned me. "These shoes I'm wearing, your mother works all year and still couldn't afford them. You're not wealthy, so why look down on Sarah?" But I never looked down on Sarah. The last time the school organized a donation for less fortunate students, I gave away all my pocket money. Listening to his words, the classmates' eyes filled with disdain. Your own family is so poor, yet you're pretending to be rich by wearing a watch. Never buy the same things as Lily, or she might accuse you of theft. What do we do now? Our school uniforms are identical. Lily probably won't claim I stole her uniform, right? Laughter erupted from the crowd. Ethan understood the significance of reputation, but was ruining mine like this. Ethan crossed his arms, impatiently urging me to apologize. Everyone was watching me, pressuring me with their stares to apologize to Sarah. But I hadn't done anything wrong. My father is a construction worker, spending most of his time on job sites. I didn't know how long he'd have to labor with steel and concrete before he could afford that watch. It was Sarah who took my watch. Why should I apologize to her? Unable to speak, the situation froze. I don't know how much time passed before the class monitor intervened. "The PE teacher is here. Let's go to class." Throughout the entire PE session, I was in a daze. After class, I returned the volleyball to the storage room. Just as I placed the ball down, I heard a loud bang as the door slammed shut. The sound of the lock echoed, and I hurried to the door. Ethan's indifferent voice came through. "I know you like me, and I know you're targeting Sarah because of me. When someone makes a mistake, they have to face punishment. Being locked in this small dark room is your consequence for misbehaving this time. I'm going to confess to Sarah tonight. After the confession, I'll let you out. Stay in there and behave." No matter how much I knocked or pleaded, he refused to unlock the door. The storage room had no windows, just the single door. There were no clocks inside, and I had lost my watch, so I couldn't tell the time. I could only watch the light outside the crack in the door grow dimmer and dimmer. It felt like night had fallen. Today was my mother's birthday. Before school, I had told her I would bake a cake for her when I got home that evening. She said she would finish work early and wait to eat the cake I made. I threw a ball at the door, kicked it with my foot, but it didn't budge. By nightfall, no one was around. I sat at the door of the storage room, burying my head and knees. The autumn night was cold and dark, and I was terrified. I feared that if I didn't return home that night, my mother would go insane with worry. When you can't see the time, it feels like time drags on endlessly. I dozed off in a semi-conscious state, and in that haze, it felt like I saw Ethan at 16. In high school, Ethan and I were finally classmates. A few classmates, after discovering my mother worked as a waitress, secretly laughed at me. They locked me in the back of the girls' bathroom and dumped a basin of cold water on my head. That day was like this. I kept banging on the door, but it was tightly shut. It was winter, and after being soaked in water, I was shivering uncontrollably. Ethan broke down the bathroom door and carried me, drenched, back to the classroom. He removed his down jacket and draped it over me, then confronted the girls. I remember him breaking a chair leg, his smile menacing, as he angrily demanded, "What's wrong with being a waitress? We're all humans, so why act like there's a hierarchy?" I huddled in his down jacket, tightly wrapped in his scent. I could look up and see his strong jawline and how his usually fierce eyes softened when he looked at me. My breath caught for a moment, and my heart felt like it was overflowing with something. But the person who once rescued me was the same one who, today, pushed me into this predicament. It turned out Ethan only enjoyed being the hero, saving others. When someone weaker than me appeared, Ethan naturally chose her. I don't remember how many times I woke up, only that there was no light outside the crack in the door. That night, I sat hugging my knees, chin resting on them, watching as daylight slowly filtered in. The sky brightened, but the feeling of youthful infatuation didn't survive until dawn. It was extinguished in the night. At the 16th hour, I finally heard voices. In the early morning, people were passing by the storage room. Their conversations were somewhat loud and all reached my ears. Did you hear? Yesterday, Ethan confessed to Sarah with a drone. Sarah likes lilies, and he prepared 999 of them. Wow, I'm so envious of her. When Ethan finally let me out, there was a smile in his eyes. He had his arm around Sarah's shoulders and urged me, "Lily, come congratulate me." I dusted myself off, ignored him, and turned to push the door open. This action seemed to upset him. He said in a low voice, "Lily, you've been really disobedient these past few days." Perhaps because his confession had been successful, he didn't get angry. Instead, he ordered me, "Remember to bring us breakfast tomorrow. Oh, and she doesn't like cold food, so bring it hot." Sarah shyly added, "Why be so picky? It's already autumn. You're asking Lily to bring it to the classroom? Isn't that putting her in a tough spot?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. He seemed a bit distracted before saying, "She can handle it. Last winter, when it was snowing, she stuffed the breakfast into her clothes. When I got it, it was still steaming." Sarah asked him, "Will she bring it for me?" Ethan gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and softly replied, "She will. She listens to me." I ignored them and went straight back to the classroom. My stomach hurt from hunger, and I longed for the meals my mother used to prepare. After packing my bag, I left the school against the flow of people. But at the school gate, I saw Sarah. This time, she was alone. Ethan wasn't by her side. She removed her watch and waved at me. "Lily, your father's watch is here. Do you want it? If you do, come get it." I walked closer to Sarah, but before I could reach her, she suddenly released the watch she had been holding high in the air. The watch fell heavily to the ground. The face shattered and glass scattered everywhere. Sarah stepped on the white strap with her foot, tilted her head, and asked, "Your watch is broken. What will you do now?" The tip of her shoe ground into my watch, each step feeling like it was crushing my heart. I clenched my fist and coldly asked, "Why did you steal my watch?" Sarah chuckled. "You think it's just a watch? Don't you think your relationship with Ethan is like this watch? Once it's broken, it can't be put back together. At this point, who cares about Ethan? I only cared about the gift from my father." I couldn't hold back anymore. With a forceful punch, I swung at her. Sarah's smile instantly turned to fear, but before my fist could land, I heard Ethan's voice in my ear. "Are you crazy?" He lunged at me and stood in front of Sarah. Ethan was 6 feet 2 inches tall, and in terms of size and strength, I was no match for him. He grabbed my right arm and threw me back with great force. The impact made me stumble 2 steps backward, my back slamming into the wall. The pain made me arch my back instinctively. On the other side, Sarah was crying in front of Ethan, looking like a flower in the rain. "She broke the gift you gave me? What the hell are you doing?" Ethan stood protectively in front of her and slowly asked, "Are you looking down on less fortunate students, or do you dislike that I have a girlfriend? The watch is mine, and it was her who broke it. Check the school's security footage, and you'll see." But Ethan looked around and laughed. "What are you pretending for? You chose to break the watch here because you knew there were no cameras, right?" Sarah's sobbing and Ethan's scolding filled the air. I hadn't rested all night, and their noise gave me a headache. Suddenly, I didn't want to say anything anymore. For those who don't believe me, no amount of explanation will help. Besides, I didn't need his belief anymore. In the cold autumn wind, Ethan left with Sarah, leaving behind only shards of glass and a motionless watch. I bent down, picked up the watch, and wiped the dust off its strap with a tissue. Then I turned my back on them and walked toward the school gate. My mother didn't go to work today. She stood at the school gate, her back slightly hunched, dark circles under her eyes. The moment she saw me come out, her tired eyes finally lit up. "You didn't come home last night. I searched for you all night and couldn't find you. I called your teacher and she said you weren't at school." My mother gripped my hand tightly. I was so worried, fearing something had happened to me. Then, Ethan came to find me and said, "You went to my house to tutor me." That made me feel better. But why would I just spend the night outside? She shook her head, carefully asking, "Tell me, what exactly happened last night? Did someone hurt you?" I didn't answer right away. My mother's gaze shifted from my tired face to the shattered watch I was holding. Her voice suddenly rose. "Did those people hurt you again? Did they lock you in the bathroom like before?" She examined me from head to toe, and seeing there were no injuries, she finally sighed in relief. But then, she slapped herself on the face and looked at me with guilt. "It's because of my job that they look down on you and bully you. I'm sorry, I failed you, made you embarrassed." How could she have failed me? She worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk, and along with my father, who worked in another city, they supported our small family. Both my mother and father were pillars in my heart. I wiped her tears away and took her calloused hand as we walked home together. On the way, my mother asked, "Have you thought about the transfer? Your father works in another city and wants to bring us both there. But I'm worried you might not adjust well to the sudden change of environment. So please think it over carefully." I hesitated for a long time. At first, I didn't want to leave the city where I had lived for over 10 years, and I didn't want to leave behind the person who waved to me every morning at the doorstep, walking me to school. I wanted to tell Ethan about the transfer. Last Tuesday after school, I stopped Ethan. He was casually leaning against the vine-covered wall, holding my bag in one hand, chewing on a mint candy. Before I could speak, he called me first. "Lily?" "What's up?" Ethan, his back to the setting sun, casually said, "I can't pick you up for school anymore. Last night, Sarah ran into some thugs in a small alley. They got handsy with her because they thought she was attractive. When I passed by, two of her shirt buttons were torn off, and she was struggling hard. When she heard footsteps, she looked back at me, her eyes red, tears making them look like a lost little deer. She looked so pitiful and fragile. I walked her home that night, and when I saw her place, I realized how tough life must be for a less fortunate student. Ethan tilted his head slightly and told me, "She's more obedient than you, and she meets me more. So, I can't pick you up anymore. I have a new mission." With every word, my heart sank a little. By the time he finished, my heart hit rock bottom. All the way he was excitedly talking about Sarah, but just 2 days ago, he couldn't stop talking about me. The once short journey now felt unbearably long, as if it would never end. When we reached my doorstep, he finally remembered me. "Oh, right, you said you wanted to tell me something before school. What was it?" I was going to inform him about the transfer, but at that moment, I simply unlocked the door and didn't even look up. Was I? I forgot. In the following days, Ethan was entirely focused on Sarah. He didn't press me for answers, and I didn't bring it up again. Now, looking into my mother's worried eyes, I nodded. Let's transfer. That way our family could be reunited. For the remaining days, my mother handled the transfer paperwork at school, and I studied alone at home. But that night, she hadn't returned yet. I tried calling her, but her phone might have been dead. I put on a coat and went out to look for her. I passed through 2 alleys and finally saw her, hunched over, walking home with a heavy heart. The street lamp cast her shadow long. When she saw me, she slowly smiled. "I'm here." On the way back, she seemed like she wanted to say something, but she opened her mouth a few times and couldn't get the words out. I couldn't help but say, "If you want to say something, just say it." My mother hesitated for a moment before speaking with difficulty. "Today I saw your classmates. They walked past me, and their conversation suddenly became loud, as if they were trying to make sure I heard. They said, 'The reason you hadn't been to school for 3 days was that you falsely accused a less fortunate student of stealing, and when it was exposed, you were too embarrassed to go back.'" Just then, my phone buzzed. There were 3 messages in a row from Ethan. "I know you like me, but you don't have to avoid me just because I have a girlfriend. We're all adults, so stop being childish. The things you did wrong, Sarah has forgiven you. Don't ruin yourself. Bring me breakfast tomorrow. I'm giving you one chance. Be a good girl, okay? I glanced at the messages, then put my phone down, looking at my mother. Mom, what do you think? She zipped up my jacket without a word of reproach, her eyes full of tenderness. They said those things about you, and it hurts to hear it. You must feel even worse inside. Though I didn't know exactly what happened, I knew what kind of person my daughter is, and no one can talk down to me about her. You must have been through a lot. I wanted to be a strong daughter in front of my mother, but for some reason, at that moment, I couldn't hold back my tears. She wiped them away. Don't cry. The transfer paperwork is all done. We'll go to a new city, to a new school, and start a new life. Through the tears, we exchanged a smile, wiped away the last of our tears, and walked up the hill together, pushing the cart. Suddenly, I remembered Ethan's messages and took out my phone. I didn't reply, I just blocked him completely. I was going to start a new life. So, Ethan, goodbye forever? In the new city, I attended college and never returned to that northern town. Ethan was sealed away in my memories. In my third year, the school held a social event. Class monitor Mia insisted that I sign up with her. Lily, just come with me. Mia was my best friend in college. Unable to resist her persistence, I agreed. By the time Mia and I arrived, many people had already gathered. Just as the event was about to start, I suddenly heard a sweet voice. Ethan, the maple leaves are just the right color. Could you take a picture of me? That voice was too familiar. I instinctively turned around and saw Sarah. The person next to her, leaning against the red maple tree with his arms crossed, his sharp features framed by a messy fringe, was Ethan. The moment I saw him, I quickly turned my head, pretending I didn't recognize him. Old acquaintances should remain in the past. There was no need for them to reappear. The host of the social event arrived and began calling out names for the groups. Soon my name was called. Lily here. The next moment, another voice sounded. Lily? I didn't need to turn around to know it was Ethan calling me. Why hasn't he left yet? Is the maple leaf that beautiful? I was swallowed up by the crowd and didn't respond to him, acting as if I didn't hear. After all, from his perspective, all he could see were a bunch of backs of heads. Who knows which one is mine? It seemed like Sarah was persuading Ethan, saying, just go, it's just a coincidence. It can't possibly be her. She's been gone for 3 whole years. She left because you exposed her for falsely accusing me of stealing, and she was too embarrassed to face me again. How could she dare show up in front of you? There was a long silence on the other side. Ethan didn't speak, and his footsteps echoed all around. I guessed he must have left with Sarah. The social event was simple. Everyone gathered, played games, and got to know each other. Time passed quickly, and as the event was about to end, a guy from my group approached me to ask for my phone number. After the event, Mia suddenly tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "There's a really handsome guy who's been staring at you since the event started. He's standing under that tree." I looked in the direction she pointed to. The area under the tree was empty, with no one there. Mia rubbed her eyes. He was just standing there. How did he disappear so quickly? She wanted to run over to check, but I stopped her. Forget about him. Let's go back to the dorm. On the way back, Mia kept talking about the guy who had been watching me. He's really handsome. During the game, I noticed he was looking at you with such intensity. Too bad you weren't with me, or I would have told you right away. His looks are definitely your type. Don't you want to think about it? Maybe if we go back, he'll be standing under the red maple tree again. She kept going on, and I interrupted her after staring at him for so long. Did you catch the brand of his denim jacket? Mia thought for a moment. From the logo, it looks like it's from LV. That's it. Ever since I've known him, aside from the school uniform, Ethan has always worn designer brands from head to toe. Mia touched her nose awkwardly and said, "Seems like he's rich and we're not from the same world. Let's forget about it." She stretched out lazily. In the end, making money is the most reliable. We should think about where we can pick up some part-time work. Mia and I both came from poor families. Since our freshman year, we've worked part-time jobs and tried hard to secure scholarships, hoping to lessen the burden on our families. After I returned to the dorm, my life went back to normal. That brief appearance of Ethan and Sarah felt like a mere illusion. Just when I thought university life would continue as usual, I suddenly saw a familiar figure at the entrance as I went downstairs. I couldn't avoid it, and our eyes met. Ethan smirked, his tone casual, but his voice was cold. "Long time no see, Lily." I glanced at him calmly but didn't greet him, turning to walk away. I had made plans for today. The guy from the last event who added me on social media was named Ryan. He had introduced me to a tutoring job and planned to take me to meet the employer today. But Ethan didn't seem ready to let me go. He coldly asked, "You've been avoiding me for 3 years. Are you going to keep avoiding me?" The crowd downstairs stopped and turned to look as soon as he said that. I couldn't lose face, so I pulled him to the side. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" He raised an eyebrow, as if hearing a joke, then suddenly pushed me against the wall. One hand pressed down on my shoulder, and the other braced against the wall as he gritted his teeth and asked, "Lily, I've been looking for you for 3 years. 3 whole years. Do you have a heart made of flesh? How dare you just disappear without saying anything?" I tried to push him away, but his grip was too strong, and I couldn't budge. His eyes were full of coldness as he lifted my chin. "How could you bear to leave me? I find it laughable. What's there to feel sorry for? We're just classmates. Do you really think I need your approval to transfer?" And he let go of me. "Classmates?" Ethan bit the word hard. "We've known each other for over 10 years, and you call us just classmates?" So he knew we had a history of over 10 years. Then what did he do? He publicly accused me of looking down on less fortunate students. He locked me in the storage room for 16 hours. He arrogantly made me bring breakfast to his girlfriend. I looked at him indifferently. "Ethan, no matter what's going on with you, don't look for me again. I don't want to see you. When I transferred, it wasn't to avoid you. I just wanted to reunite with my father. You overestimate yourself. And hurry up and let go of me. If Sarah sees this, you'll be in trouble. And I will be too." His grip didn't loosen. Ethan tilted his head to scrutinize me, and his furrowed brow slightly relaxed. "Lily, are you jealous of Sarah? You still like me, don't you?" I've already... Before he could finish, Ryan, who had agreed to meet me downstairs, arrived. He froze when he saw the situation. "Lily, are you still going out with me tonight?" Ethan turned to look at him, narrowing his eyes slightly. "Is this the guy you met at the last event?" He suddenly released me, raised an eyebrow at Ryan, and asked with a half smile, "So, you two are already chatting? Going out on a date tonight?" Before Ryan could answer, Ethan unexpectedly punched him in the face. Ryan, who was usually polite and refined, was no match for Ethan. His glasses shattered and a bruise appeared on his cheek. "You want to lay hands on my woman? You should look at yourself in the mirror first. Do you really think you're good enough? Are you out of your mind?" I yanked Ethan's hair and pulled him away. Ryan had never seen anything like this and was stunned, rooted to the spot, unable to move. It wasn't until the patrolling security guards arrived that they broke up the scene. Ethan paid for Ryan's medical bills and glasses. "I thought you two were going on a date. I didn't know you were bringing her to find a part-time job." Ryan's injuries were because of me, so I apologized repeatedly. He pursed his lips and said nothing, grabbed the money, and walked away. That evening, he deleted my contact information, and the tutoring job we had planned was also gone. I turned and walked away, not wanting to look at Ethan anymore, but he called out to me from behind. "I haven't finished talking. I broke up with Sarah a long time ago. We've been broken up for 3 years. I've been looking for you all this time." The autumn wind stirred the fallen maple leaves. The dim streetlight cast a yellow glow on Ethan. When I turned back, his eyes were shining. Sarah's family is struggling, and I felt sorry for her, so I've been helping her finish her studies. Right now, what we have is just a relationship between a sponsor and a sponsored student. She's studying in this city. She just happened to come with me to visit your school that day. That's all. And about the things from back then. Ethan? I interrupted him and told him seriously. "Who you're with now is none of my business. I really don't like you. Please stay out of my life and don't bother me again." Ethan stood there, frozen, unable to speak for a moment. As I turned to head back to the dorm, light rain began to fall. People hurried along, seeking shelter from the rain. But Ethan seemed oblivious, standing silently in place. Even when a leaf from the maple tree landed on his shoulder, he didn't notice. standing still. I didn't look back. I went to the dorm, took a hot shower, and curled up in bed, looking at part-time job listings. In the following days, I often saw Ethan. He was always alone, watching me from a distance. I ignored him, pretending not to notice. He never spoke, silently watching me walk away. And today, at the Maple Garden cafeteria, I ran into another familiar face, Sarah. She asked someone to help her recharge her campus card and placed her tray opposite mine. Let's talk, old classmate. That day at the social event, I only glanced at Sarah briefly and didn't get a good look at her. Now that she sat across from me, I realized that the person who had changed the most over the past 3 years was actually Sarah. The once less fortunate student now looked incredibly wealthy. Wearing a Hermès necklace, carrying a Dior bag, and draped in a Chanel coat. From head to toe, she was wearing designer brands, just like Ethan. She gave a quick look at my outfit, then smirked. "After all these years, you still look so shabby." I didn't want to engage with her, so I lowered my head and ate. But she insisted on striking up a conversation. "You don't seriously think Ethan likes you, do you? Well, you're wrong. Back then, your sudden departure threw Ethan off balance, so he searched for you everywhere. Once he found you, he filled that gap. How long do you think he'll still be interested in you?" Sarah fiddled with her nails and smirked. "Don't forget, in his eyes, you're the one who slandered and bullied a less fortunate student. That's always been a thorn in his heart. He's a soft-hearted guy, so as long as I act pitiful in front of him and bring up old memories, sooner or later, he'll grow tired of you." As if she had thought of something, Sarah chuckled lowly. "Oh, right, you probably don't know. I've been by Ethan's side these past 3 years. When he came here for college, I came with him. All these necklaces and bags, he bought them for me." She really was so annoying. "Who cares about competing for trash with you?" I ate my meal in silence, wasting money on it. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Are you pretending? A girl from a poor family like you must be jealous deep down, seeing how I can live like this." Before she could finish, Mia, holding her tray, walked up to us, grabbed her bowl of soup, and splashed the seaweed egg drop soup directly onto Sarah's face. Sarah screamed in surprise, glaring at Mia angrily. Mia quickly pulled her hand back. "Oh no, I didn't hold it steady. Sorry about that. But classmate, we earn our living with our own hands, so what's so poor about us?" She tossed Sarah a napkin, grabbed me as we finished eating, and left. After that day, Sarah and Ethan disappeared from my sight. My world returned to peace. The student I was tutoring called in sick that weekend, and I hadn't been home for weeks, so I called my mother and told her I'd be coming home this week. My mother was really happy on the other end of the phone, saying she'd make my favorite dishes. When I got home that evening, the table was already filled with food. "You're back," my parents said as they came out of the kitchen, urging me to sit down. My mother smiled at me. "You won't believe it. Guess who showed up?" At the table, there was already someone sitting. It was Ethan. When I saw him in my house, every drop of blood in my body seemed to freeze. My parents had already sat down, urging me. "Why are you still standing there?" I had a lot to say, but seeing the joyful expressions on my parents' faces, the words stuck in my throat. I numbly pulled out a chair and sat next to my mother. While my mother served Ethan some food, she happily said, "Funny, I just ran into Ethan the other day." I asked, and it turned out he was studying here too. Ethan smiled and said, "I didn't expect Lily to be in Wuhan. Guess it's fate." I don't know why, but suddenly they started talking about the past. Ethan took a sip of soda and asked, "Do you remember that time you were shoved on the stairs and twisted your ankle? I carried you to the hospital and you were lying on my back, whining about how much it hurt. It was snowing heavily that day." I was holding onto Ethan's neck, pressed against his ear, which had turned bright red from the cold. Looking back, all I could see in the snow were footprints stretching far into the distance. At that time, I naively thought our lives could overlap, just like those footprints in the snow. He seemed lost in the distant memory and said a lot. He mentioned getting into a fight where the other party was many against one and his ear was scratched. I found him on the playground and dragged him home, carefully cleaning his wound at dusk. He also talked about how, ever since I fainted from low blood sugar, he kept a stash of candy in his pocket and eventually got into the habit of eating candy himself. By the time he finished, my mother sighed a little. Back in the old town, her best friend was you. Before she transferred, she had so much going on at home, she didn't even have time to invite you out for a meal. She placed some eggplant on my plate and smiled. Do you remember the night before you transferred? You were bullied and didn't come home all night. I was about to lose my mind. Ethan is such a kind boy, she continued. He told me you were helping him with a lesson, so I wouldn't worry. Hearing this, Ethan froze for a moment, then awkwardly tugged at the corner of his mouth, but didn't respond. I suddenly felt nauseous. Locking me in the storage room and then pretending to be the good guy in front of my mother? How dare he act like that in front of me? A villain shouldn't be treated as a hero. Mom, I began. That night when I didn't come home, I was locked in the school's storage room. My mother, who had been trying to protect me from the truth back then, immediately asked, "Who locked you?" Ethan. Both of my parents were stunned. They put down their chopsticks and looked at Ethan with heavy gazes. Ethan hadn't expected me to suddenly bring this up. He swallowed the lotus root slice in his mouth and hurriedly explained, "This is how it went. Remember, your uncle bought Lily a watch? Well, I gave the same watch to a less fortunate student in my class. Lily lost hers and then blamed the poor student, humiliating her in front of everyone. I was young and impulsive. I thought Lily had done something wrong and should be punished, so I locked her in the storage room. I didn't mean anything by it, I just wanted her to learn a lesson." By the end of his explanation, he looked directly at me and, for the first time, apologized. "Lily, no matter what, locking you up for a whole night was my fault. I'm sorry. I ignored him and just looked at my parents. I wanted to see their reaction. My mother's gentle smile disappeared. So, Lily looks down on less fortunate students? She lost something and then blamed it on the poor student? Ethan remained silent. His silence spoke louder than words. "Ethan, you've known Lily for 11 years. 11 years, not 11 days. Don't you know what kind of person she is?" My mother suddenly stood up, pointed toward the door, and shouted, "Get out of my house!" My father said nothing, but with disgust, he grabbed Ethan's jacket and dragged him toward the door, slamming it shut behind them. "I thought you were a good kid, but it turns out you've been bullying her." My mother couldn't hold back her anger, hands on her hips, shouting at him, "What a piece of trash!" She cursed for a long time through the door, then turned around and put her arm around my shoulder. "You've been wronged. I'm never talking to that trash again." My father didn't ask what happened back then. He just came over and stood by me. He's not usually someone who expresses himself, but now he awkwardly said, "We believe in you. You would never do something like that. You don't need to explain. Your father believes in you. See, that's my forever support and confidence." After Ethan left, we ate even more happily. When I headed back to school that week, my parents took me to the subway station. I had just boarded the train when someone cautiously asked, "Lily, is that you?" I turned to look and saw a girl looking at me shyly. Her face seemed familiar. After a moment of thinking, I realized it was Ivy, my classmate from high school. She sat in the back row, didn't talk much, and we didn't have much interaction. When she saw me, she was so happy and started chatting with me for several stops. We exchanged phone numbers. I got off at the next station, but she got off one stop earlier than me. Before she left, she suddenly said, "Lily, I'm sorry." I didn't know what she was apologizing for, and I wanted to ask, but the subway doors closed, and she quickly disappeared from my sight. The chat was empty, and she never brought up the apology again. I thought I might have imagined it. That night, right after I got back to the dorm, she added me to a group. The group included Ethan and Sarah. It was the class group from high school. With me added, there were 53 classmates in total. Then she tagged me in the group and sent a long, long message. I never expected that the truth, which had been hidden for years, would suddenly be exposed 3 years later, out of the blue. During the senior year physical checkup, we had to get a chest x-ray and were forbidden from bringing in anything metallic. I took off my watch and put it in my backpack. Sarah was the first to finish all the checkup items and return to the classroom. She went through my backpack, found my watch, and put it on her wrist. Then, she left the classroom and returned with the others. But that day, Ivy didn't go for the checkup because she wasn't feeling well. When Sarah first came back to the classroom, Ivy happened to walk out of the bathroom. She saw Sarah stealing my watch and putting it on. I heard you guys mocking Lily, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. But I was too weak back then, and following the principle of not getting involved in unnecessary trouble, I just kept my head down and didn't say anything. My conscience has been uneasy. After Lily transferred schools, I felt even guiltier. I kept thinking I owed her an apology. If I ever saw her again, I would definitely apologize in person and tell her the truth. Lily, I'm so sorry. I knew you were innocent, but when the other classmates were mocking you, I chose to stay silent and let them tear you apart. Over the years, I've dreamed about that day countless times, seeing the uncomfortable look on your face. I really am sorry. I stared at these words, unable to speak for a long time. After a while, my old deskmate suddenly spoke up in the group. Actually, that day, I saw another watch in Sarah's drawer. The one Lily was wearing really was hers, not the one Sarah had. But I knew Ethan liked Sarah, and I knew he came from a wealthy family. I didn't want to offend Ethan, so I stayed quiet. Lily, I'm so sorry. The truth stirred up a storm. Classmates who hadn't spoken in years suddenly flooded the group with messages. I blindly believed Ethan back then and wrongly blamed you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said such hurtful things. I'm sorry. I just picked a side without knowing the truth. I'm sorry. I stared at these messages for a long time, then sighed deeply. It's okay. It's all in the past now. In fact, the ones who should be apologizing aren't them, but the instigators, the ones who stole from me and hypocritically smeared my name, the ones who had known me for 11 years but still pushed me into the abyss. And yet, Ethan and Sarah remained silent. Before long, I received a friend request. Lily, it's Ethan. I have something I want to say to you. I didn't accept his request. It was strange. The truth had come out, but suddenly I felt like crying. Mia happened to return to the dorm, and I turned to ask her, why is it that when there's conflict, bystanders always instinctively side with the wealthy? She handed me a bottle of alcohol. Want some? Sure. We clinked glasses on the balcony, where we were hanging clothes. The moon was full tonight. Under the moon, after a bit of drinking, our feelings couldn't stay hidden. Who didn't go through some messed up stuff in high school? Mia leaned back in her chair, squinting her eyes slightly. Back then, I liked someone named Jake. One time, after a physical checkup, Jake's ex insisted that there was a bug in my backpack and made me dump everything out in front of everyone. My sanitary pads fell out, loose ones. I knew they weren't ideal, but I was at my poorest, and I couldn't afford branded ones. Jake's ex laughed and asked how I could be so poor. Someone asked if Jake liked me. His ex immediately said, how could Jake like a poor girl like her? I crouched down to pack my bag quietly, but secretly hoped Jake would say something to defend me. Mia smiled bitterly, her eyes full of loneliness. He was always special to me. We even promised to go to the same city for college. I thought he liked me too. But that day, he didn't say a word of defense. He just turned around and left, like being seen with me was something shameful. So when it came time to apply for college, I didn't follow our promise. I stayed far away from him. All these years, I never understood why Jake ran away that day. I wasn't bad looking, my grades were great, and I was a good person. Maybe the only flaw was being poor. That probably embarrassed him, being from a wealthy family. But Lily, our family situation isn't something we can choose. What we can do is make ourselves better. Look, we study hard for scholarships, we don't let our families worry, and we live our own lives. There's nothing shameful about that. Really? She had never told me this before, and I had never mentioned Ethan, either. We both had a low tolerance for alcohol. After drinking a bit, we were already tipsy and clinked glasses again. I patted her on the shoulder. Today is a good day. I finally cleared my name. Mia took a big gulp and spat. Pfft. Today is definitely not a good day. Damn it, I ran into Jake at school. He's here as an exchange student for a year. He was red-eyed, looking for me, saying how I promised to go to the same city with him and how I could break my word. Mia mumbled, her eyes starting to water. I was drunk by then, and I forgot everything she said afterward. It all slipped away from my memory. The next morning, when I woke up, I saw Sarah's photo on social media. It was just a side profile, but I could immediately recognize her. The caption read, "Is it reasonable for someone receiving government assistance to wear designer clothes?" The post mentioned that Sarah applied for aid every year, but she lived better than most people, even refusing to stay in the school dorms and renting an entire apartment off campus. I found it somewhat ridiculous. She truly never missed a chance to grab whatever money was available. I didn't comment, just silently closed the page. 4 days later, after leaving the library and passing by the May Garden CBD, I ran into Ethan again. His face looked awful, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Can we talk?" I went back to my hometown and learned some things. In the cafe, Ethan looked at me with a sense of guilt. I saw the messages in the group that day. I asked Sarah about it, but she denied everything. The next morning, I immediately bought a ticket to go back home and found those thugs. They were still hanging around on the streets. After I gave them money, they told me that Sarah had known them for a long time. Sarah knew I had a habit of running at night, so she staged that whole scene on my regular route, making me play the hero and save her. I misjudged her. Sarah may have been poor, but she was never some fragile, delicate flower. She's a snake. Everything was part of her plan, all directed by her. I immediately stopped all my financial support to her. He said all of this in one breath, biting his lip as he looked at me. "I'm sorry. I misunderstood you for all these years. I really wasn't able to see her true nature. Lily, if I could do it all over again, I would never have done that. I..." He took a deep breath, struggling to say, "I've always had you in my heart, from way back. Even then, Sarah was just a temporary distraction, sparking my protective instincts, but that wasn't love. I'm just so slow to realize things. It wasn't until you... I'm just so slow to realize things. It wasn't until you left that I finally understood my true feelings. When I was 18, I saw your draft paper. It wasn't just formulas. It was filled with my name and scratched out words saying, 'I love you.' So you really did like me back then, didn't you? Then, in light of the 11 years we've known each other, could you give me a chance to start over?" He reached out his hand to me. I felt like I was seeing the 18-year-old Lily again. The summer of 18, when the grass grew wildly and the August wind blew through the streets, with dust climbing the walls. Back then, the feeling of falling for someone was like endless wild grass. When Ethan reached out his hand, I would have run to him, lifting the hem of my skirt. But the 21-year-old Lily staring at his hand so close only felt repulsed. That night in the storage room, before dawn, I had already stopped liking him. "I accept your apology, but from now on, let's just pretend we don't know each other." I stood up indifferently and walked away. Ethan remained seated in the cafe. People came and went around him. The coffee on the table went cold, but he didn't move. Eventually, the embossed pattern on the surface began to ripple. The coffee had turned bitter and salty. Ethan and Sarah both disappeared from my life. I learned of Sarah's latest news from Ivy. She told me that Sarah's assistance had been cut off, and Ethan had also stopped all his financial support to her. Having grown accustomed to a good life for all these years, transitioning from luxury to austerity was too much for her to handle. She couldn't stand the thought of downgrading her lifestyle. She considered taking a part-time job, but found it tiring and inconvenient, feeling like it would take away from her leisure time. So she ended up borrowing money from a loan shark. Later, I saw the names Sarah and Ethan in the news. Sarah couldn't repay her online loans and went to ask Ethan for money. They had a huge argument and parted ways in anger. That night, Ethan got in his car, intending to leave, but Sarah blocked his car and told him, "If you don't give me money, I'll stand in front of it and won't move a step." After a long standoff, it seemed they started reminiscing about their high school days. According to the parking lot surveillance footage, the two of them had a big fight. As dawn approached, in a fit of rage, Ethan slammed the accelerator. The car hit Sarah. She lost too much blood and fainted on the spot. After being rushed to the hospital, she was declared brain dead and became a vegetable. As for Ethan, he was arrested on charges of a crime and faced prison time. After reading this report, I felt a bit melancholic. At 18, my youthful love died in the dim morning light. At 21, the story stretched no further than the first light of dawn. And me, I'm different from them. The sun will rise at the end of the darkness, lifting me up. I will continue to live brightly in this precious world.